On the afternoon of Honoria Mercer's 70th birthday, a rain-soaked girl walked into the finest printing shop in Bellweather, Ohio, and placed half a paper queen beside the cake. The queen had been cut from stiff cream card. Her crown was touched with gold, her gown printed in faded blue, and one hand was raised as if commanding an invisible court. The other half of her body had been torn away. Along the jagged edge ran a stain of violet ink. Ada Mercer knew that stain. Her dead husband had mixed that color himself. Thomas had called it evening violet, though in daylight it looked almost black. No printer in Bellweather had ever matched it, and after his death the little jar in the composing room had dried into a hard, shining crust. The girl could not have been more than 11. Water ran from the hem of her brown wool dress and gathered on the black and white tiles. Her shoes were too large. One lace had been replaced by string. She looked neither at the cake nor at the ladies from the Methodist circle who had stopped speaking one by one. She looked directly at Ada. She said that Mr. Thomas Mercer had promised her mother the rest of the theater. Then she asked where he was. For 4 years, Ada had learned to hear her husband's name without showing pain. She had heard it at church memorials, at the bank, and every morning when the new sign above the shop caught the sun. Mercer and Son, established 1871. The son had been dead since 1898, but Honoria would not have the lettering changed. A dead son, in her judgment, was more respectable than a living widow. Ada reached for the paper queen. Honoria reached first. Her mother-in-law sat at the head of the long display table in a high-backed chair brought down from the family parlor. She wore black silk, not because she was still in mourning, but because black made other colors look frivolous. A cameo fastened her collar. Her white hair was arranged in smooth coils. Even at 70, with a silver-knobbed cane against her knee, she gave the impression that the room had been built around her. She lifted the torn figure between 2 fingers. The girl said her name was Nell Weller. Her mother, Ruth, had died at the county infirmary 6 days earlier. Before the fever took her speech, she had told Nell to go to Mercer Printing and show the queen to Thomas. She had said he would understand. The silence that followed was not the tender silence given to a child in grief. It was the silence of people waiting to learn what kind of scandal they had been invited to witness. Honoria turned the paper over. For the smallest instant, her face changed. Ada saw the color leave the thin skin around her mouth. Then the old composure returned. Honoria told the girl that Thomas Mercer had been an honorable married man, that desperate women had long used dead gentlemen's names because the dead could not defend themselves, and that a respectable place of business could not reward such behavior. She spoke quietly. That made it worse. Nell did not understand every word, but she understood enough. Her shoulders drew inward. One of the church ladies lowered her eyes to her gloves. Another leaned toward her neighbor, already preparing the account she would repeat over supper. Ada asked to see the queen. Honoria laid it flat beneath her hand. She reminded Ada that guests were present. She said the child could be given a roll and directed to the parish office. Then she looked toward Edwin Mercer, Thomas's younger brother, who stood near the press-room door with a watch chain bright across his vest. Edwin moved at once. He had inherited Honoria's habit of turning obedience into a form of virtue. He took Nell gently by the elbow and guided her toward the street, apologizing to the ladies for the interruption. The girl did not struggle. At the threshold, she twisted free just long enough to look back at Ada. There was no accusation in her face. That was what Ada remembered afterward. Only disappointment, too familiar for a child of 11. Then the door shut. Rain silvered the glass. The ladies began to breathe again. Honoria folded the torn queen once, breaking the cardboard across its printed face, and slipped it into the pocket of her skirt. The birthday cake was cut. Ada stood behind the counter while compliments moved around her. She poured coffee from the nickel pot. She accepted praise for the gilt-edged church programs she had bound that morning. She watched Honoria receive a silver vase from the Business Association and heard Edwin announce that Mercer & Son would soon purchase a new cylinder press. All the while, one thought moved through her with the steady pressure of a blade through paper. Thomas had printed the queen, she was certain. At 5:30, the last guest left. Edwin went to the Elks' rooms. Honoria retired upstairs, claiming fatigue. The pressman had already gone home, leaving the shop full of the evening smells Ada knew better than any perfume. Ink, hot metal, damp paper, paste, and the faint mineral odor of rain entering through old brick. Ada closed the cash drawer. She covered the cake. She put the cups into a basin. Then she took her coat from the peg and went into the rain. Bellweather had grown around 2 factories, a courthouse, and the Ohio and Western line, though the railroad did not own the town's heart. That belonged to the square, where shop windows glowed through the wet dusk, and the courthouse clock told 3 different times from 3 visible faces. Ada passed the apothecary, the harness maker, and the hotel whose dining room Honoria considered noisy. At the corner, a streetcar clattered past, yellow lamps trembling behind steamed windows. She found Nell under the awning of the closed feed store. The child was eating the birthday roll in small bites. Edwin had remembered that much. A parcel wrapped in newspaper rested beside her. She had no coat, only a knitted gray shawl drawn over her hair. Ada asked where she meant to sleep. Nell said the infirmary matron had given her until noon to collect her mother's things. The county agent intended to send her to the children's home in Marlow the next morning. She had left before he arrived because her mother had said Thomas Mercer would help. When Ada explained that Thomas was dead, Nell looked toward the rain and nodded. She had already learned that promises could expire before the people carrying them reached the proper door. Ada asked what was in the parcel. Nell unfolded the newspaper. Inside lay 2 stockings, a comb with missing teeth, a man's red handkerchief, and several paper figures. There was a huntsman without a head, a green tree, a wolf, and the left wall of a miniature stage. Each piece had been colored by hand. Along the stage wall, tiny roses climbed a printed lattice. Ada touched one rose. Thomas had drawn roses that way, with 5 blunt petals and a dot too large at the center. He used to sketch them in the margins of invoices while listening to Edwin complain. Once, during their first year of marriage, he had printed a whole sheet of them and pasted them inside Ada's sewing box. She had kept the box after the roses faded, after the hinges loosened, after nearly everything else from that hopeful first year became painful to look at. She asked where Ruth had received the pieces. Nell said Mr. Mercer had brought them when her mother worked at the old Franklin house. He had come on Tuesday evenings, always through the kitchen, and he had shown Nell how the paper people stood in slots cut into a wooden floor. He had promised a palace, a forest, and a boat. Then he stopped coming. Ruth had packed the pieces away and would not speak of him until the week she died. The rain struck the awning hard enough to blur the town. Thomas had spent Tuesday evenings at the volunteer reading room. That was what he had told Ada. She had never doubted him, at least she had never admitted doubt while he lived. After his death, doubt had come easily. It entered empty rooms. It sat at the foot of the bed. It gave new meanings to remembered delays and softened voices. Ada had hated herself for entertaining it, but grief was not loyal. Grief opened every locked drawer. Nell gathered the pieces quickly, perhaps mistaking Ada's silence for another refusal. Ada told her she could stay one night in the small room above the bindery. The child looked at her then. Her eyes were gray, almost colorless, and much older than the narrow face around them. Ada made the conditions clear. In the morning they would speak to the county agent. Nell would not run away again. She would wash, eat, and tell the truth, even if the truth was unpleasant. Nell agreed to all 3 with the solemnity of a person signing a contract. They returned by the alley entrance. Ada chose the alley because she did not want Mrs. Cobb at the millinery shop to see them. That small act of cowardice stayed with her longer than the rain. The bindery occupied the rear half of the 2nd floor. Beyond it were 2 rooms where Ada had lived since Thomas's death. Honoria occupied the better rooms at the front, above the shop windows, and Edwin kept a bedroom there, though he often slept at his club. The little unused chamber beside Ada's had once stored sample books. She had cleared it the previous winter and placed a narrow iron bed against the wall, telling herself she needed space for visiting cousins who never came. Nell stood dripping on the oilcloth while Ada heated water on the gas ring. The girl washed behind a folding screen and changed into one of Ada's old nightdresses, its hem pinned up twice. Ada warmed potato soup and cut the last heel from a loaf. Nell ate without lifting her head. Only after the bowl was empty did Ada notice a bruise darkening the child's wrist. Nell said the county agent had held her when she tried to leave. She said it without anger. Adults held children when children did not go where they were told. Ada found a clean strip of muslin and wrapped the wrist, though the bruise needed no bandage. Her hands knew how to smooth cloth over small bones. The knowledge seemed to come from nowhere, and from every year she had spent pretending she did not possess it. At 10 o'clock, Nell lay in the iron bed with the paper figures arranged on the washstand. The green tree leaned against the pitcher, the wolf lay flat. The headless huntsman faced the wall. Ada lowered the lamp. Nell asked whether Mrs. Mercer would put her out in the morning. Ada said Mrs. Mercer did not decide everything in the house. It was not true yet, but spoken aloud in the small room, it sounded like something that might become true. Ada returned to her own bed and did not undress. The rain weakened after midnight. Water ticked from the gutter. Below, the building settled around the presses, timbers releasing the day's strain with soft cracks. She thought of Thomas in the Franklin House kitchen, cutting slots into a wooden stage for another woman's child. She thought of Honoria's hand closing over the queen. At 2 in the morning, she heard the connecting door open. Nell stood there holding the paper tree. She said someone had been in her room. The parcel was open on the floor. The wolf and the stage wall remained. The headless huntsman remained. But the paper queen was gone. Ada lit the hall lamp and searched the room twice. She looked beneath the iron bed, inside the washstand drawer, and behind the curtain where sample books had once been stacked. Nell watched from the doorway, gripping the paper tree by its trunk. There was no queen. The door to the bindery stood open. Ada was certain she had closed it. A faint trace of Honoria's lavender water lingered near the stairs. She felt a sharp, almost childish desire to go at once to the front rooms and demand the truth. Then she pictured Honoria sitting upright beneath the carved walnut headboard, receiving accusation as if it were an application submitted in the wrong form. Honoria would deny entering. She would ask whether Ada had searched the child's pockets. By breakfast, the disappearance would somehow become evidence of Nell's unfitness. Ada closed the bindery door and pushed a chair beneath the knob. She told Nell they would find the queen later. The child placed the tree beside the remaining figures and returned to bed. Ada sat in the chair until dawn. At 7, the building woke in its usual order. The furnace pipes knocked. Delivery wagons rolled over the alley stones. Mr. Pike, the oldest compositor, entered through the rear with his lunch tin. Then came Frank Beale and the press boys, bringing cold air and the smell of tobacco. Downstairs, Edwin unlocked the front door precisely at 7:30, because punctuality was the virtue he displayed when imagination failed him. Honoria appeared at breakfast in dove-gray wool. She expressed surprise to see Nell at the table, though Ada noticed a crescent of evening violet ink beneath the nail of her right thumb. Ada did not mention it. She explained that the girl would remain until the county agent arrived. Honoria buttered a piece of toast and said the county agent should be spared the trip. Edwin could escort Nell to the morning train. Nell stopped chewing. Ada replied that a child whose mother had just died would not be put on a train before anyone had asked what arrangements the mother made. Honoria said Ruth Weller had made her arrangement when she instructed the child to approach a married man in his widow's place of business. The words were intended for Ada, not Nell. They found their mark. For 14 years, Ada had lived beneath Honoria's talent for injury without spectacle. Her mother-in-law never raised her voice. She did not slam doors, repeat gossip, or use crude names. She merely placed the most painful possibility in the center of a room and allowed everyone else to walk around it. Ada felt the old weakness begin in her stomach. It was the same sensation she had known after the second doctor left their bedroom, after Honoria folded away the infant shirts Ada had sewn during her first pregnancy, after Thomas began saying that perhaps a quiet house was a blessing. Ada had answered cruelty with composure so often that many people in Bellweather considered the two women alike. Nell set down her spoon. She said her mother had never asked Thomas for anything improper. Honoria looked at the child as if a chair had spoken. Nell continued. Mr. Mercer had brought paper and oranges. He had read stories. Once he had repaired the Franklin House stove when smoke filled the kitchen. Her mother had always made him leave before the supper guests came down. Edwin asked why an honorable visit needed to be hidden. Nell had no answer. Ada did. In Bellweather, a gentleman could spend an hour at the billiard room without explanation. He could sit alone with a banker behind a shut door or travel overnight with a salesman. But if he entered a hotel kitchen to speak with a laundress, the town required either sin or charity. Simple human loyalty was too uninteresting to survive. Before she could say this, the bell over the shop door rang. The county agent introduced himself as Mr. Sloane. He had a damp mustache, a brown overcoat polished at the elbows, and the tired impatience of a man required to move too many people into too few places. He listened while Ada explained. Then he asked Nell why she had left the infirmary. Nell said she had followed her mother's last instruction. Mr. Sloane replied that last instructions did not set aside county authority. The Marlowe Children's Home had beds, meals, schooling, and a matron. Nell would be safe there until she could be placed with a family. Ada asked what kind of family. Mr. Sloane described farm households needing girls who were old enough to mind younger children, carry water, and help with poultry. He called it placement, not labor. His language did not change the redness in Nell's hands. Ada asked whether the child could stay with her temporarily. The breakfast room became very still. Mr. Sloane looked from Ada to Honoria, then toward the door leading to the print shop. He knew the Mercer name. Everyone in the county knew it from election bills, wedding invitations, handbills, funeral cards, and the weekly Bellweather record. He asked whether Ada was proposing employment. Ada said she was proposing a home while Ruth's affairs were examined. Honoria laid down her knife. She informed Mr. Sloane that her daughter-in-law was kind, but had suffered periods of nervous exhaustion. The family business occupied all her strength. No sensible authority would place a bereaved child in rooms above a shop, under the care of a woman with no experience of children and no husband. Ada heard Nell draw a breath. Mr. Sloane did not ask whether the exhaustion had occurred 8 years earlier, after Ada lost a baby in the 5th month. He did not ask whether she had missed a day's work since Thomas died. He wrote something in his notebook. Honoria offered a donation to the Marlowe home for winter shoes. That was how she ended disputes. Money closed the door, and respectability locked it. Ada stood. Her knees trembled beneath her skirt. She placed both hands on the table so no one would see. She told Mr. Sloane that the building belonged in equal share to herself and Honoria under Thomas's will, that her income from the bindery was sufficient, and that the small chamber had a bed, a window, heat, and a door that locked. She said she would submit to any inspection required. Until then, Nell would not be transported like a parcel merely because the most influential person in the room had spoken first. Edwin's face reddened. Honoria did not move. Only the ink beneath her thumbnail betrayed her. Mr. Sloane asked Ada whether she understood the responsibility. She answered that she understood what happened when responsibility was left entirely to people in a hurry. For the first time, Nell looked less tired than astonished. Mr. Sloane agreed to 48 hours. He would inspect the rooms that afternoon and consult the probate judge. Nell was not to leave the premises without Ada. If a suitable relation appeared, the arrangement would end. When he departed, Honoria remained seated. She said Ada had embarrassed the family before a public officer. Ada replied that the family had survived worse embarrassments in private. The sentence surprised them both. Honoria rose with difficulty, took her cane, and went to the front rooms. Edwin followed her, but at the threshold he turned and warned Ada that sentiment must not interfere with the new press contract. The shop could not afford disruption. Ada almost laughed. The shop had afforded Edwin's failed stationery scheme, his 3-month trip to Chicago, and the mahogany desk he claimed impressed commercial customers. It could afford a bowl of oatmeal for a child. She brought Nell downstairs. The bindery was Ada's true country. Its geography consisted of cutting tables, sewing frames, glue pots, backing hammers, stacks of folded signatures, and brass type for stamping names. Here, no one called her delicate. She could lift a bundle of board that made Edwin call for a boy. She could judge paper grain by touch and repair a broken family Bible without losing a flake of brittle leather. When Thomas lived, he had designed and printed. Ada had made his loose pages endure. She gave Nell a stool near the window and showed her how to fold waste sheets into packets. The child worked slowly at first, matching corners with fierce care. After an hour, her folds were cleaner than those of the new apprentice. Mr. Pike watched over his spectacles. Amos Pike had worked beside Thomas from the day the younger Mercer learned to set type. He was 61, narrow as a composing stick, with hands permanently dark at the creases. Since Thomas's death, he had spoken to Ada mostly about jobs and weather. Now his gaze rested on Nell's paper figures, which he had placed along the window ledge. He picked up the stage wall. His thumb passed over the roses. Ada asked whether he recognized them. Mr. Pike put the piece down too quickly. He said Thomas drew roses on everything. Nell told him about the missing queen. The old compositor glanced toward the ceiling. Then he returned to his type case and began distributing letters with unusual force. At noon, while Nell ate bread and cheese in the back room, Ada approached him again. She asked whether Thomas had printed a paper theater. Mr. Pike kept his eyes on the case. He said printers made many things that never appeared in order books. Ada asked whether he had known Ruth Weller. His hand stopped above the compartment for lowercase e. He told her some questions reached backward farther than the person asking expected. Then he gathered his composing stick and moved to the other side of the room. That afternoon, Mr. Sloane inspected the chambers. Honoria remained absent. Ada showed the iron bed, the gas bracket, the washstand, the clean linens, and the window opening onto the alley. She did not mention the missing queen or the chair beneath the knob. Mr. Sloane approved a temporary stay of 7 days. The probate judge would hear Ada's petition the following Tuesday. 7 days. Nell received the news without celebration. She asked whether she must call Ada Mrs. Mercer. Ada said Mrs. Ada would do. That evening they carried Ruth's parcel to the bindery and examined every piece. The stage wall had tabs at the bottom. The tree and wolf bore tiny numbers. The huntsman's severed neck was not torn. It had been printed that way, meant to receive a separate head. On the reverse of each figure was a small mark, a star enclosed in a circle. Ada had seen that mark before. Thomas used it only on gifts. Their first Christmas after marriage, he printed a book of poems for her in an edition of 1. A star inside a circle appeared on the title page. He said it meant no customer, no invoice, no debt. It meant the work belonged entirely to affection. Ada had not opened that book since his funeral. She went to the bottom drawer of her wardrobe and lifted out a cedar box. Beneath 2 black gloves and Thomas's watch lay the slim green volume. She opened it at the title page. The same star looked back at her. Nell touched it with 1 finger. She said her mother had a mark like that on her shoulder. Not ink. A birthmark. Round, pale brown, with 5 darker points around it. Ada felt the room alter around her. The mark on the paper was not exactly a star. She saw that now. The points were unequal. One leaned sharply to the left. It was a printer's copy of something Thomas had seen on skin. From the front rooms came the measured tap of Honoria's cane. Nell turned toward the sound. Ada closed the book, but not before she remembered a summer afternoon many years earlier, when Honoria's sleeve had slipped as she reached for a teacup. High on Honoria's left arm, almost hidden by lace, had been a pale brown mark with 5 darker points. Ada did not sleep that night. She lay beneath the sloped ceiling, listening to Nell breathe in the adjoining room and to Honoria's cane cross the front parlor at intervals. The older woman was awake too. Each journey began at her bedroom, paused near the locked cabinet where family papers were kept, and ended by the window overlooking Main Street. At dawn, Ada told herself that birthmarks repeated in families and sometimes appeared by chance. She told herself that Thomas's little emblem might have no connection to either woman. A star was only a star. A printer needed a device, and Thomas liked simple shapes. Yet Honoria had stolen the queen. That fact remained when every softer explanation was exhausted. The following days acquired the peculiar brightness of time under judgment. Ada measured them by ordinary tasks. Monday brought the hotel menus. Tuesday brought 400 labels for Pritchard's cough elixir. Wednesday brought a rush order of memorial cards for a farmer killed beneath a wagon. Paper entered the shop blank and left carrying remedies, prices, prayers, and names. Nell sat at the bindery window, folding, sorting, and learning the letters in the type drawers. She knew how to read, though gaps appeared in unexpected places. She could manage a newspaper headline but stumbled over the names of common birds. Ruth had taught her from hotel menus, discarded advertisements, and a single storybook missing its first 12 pages. Nell believed every proper story began in a forest because hers did. Ada found a school primer in the storeroom. Each evening they read 2 pages. Nell resisted words she could not master on the first attempt. She would press her lips together and stare until the print blurred. Ada learned not to correct too quickly. If she waited, the child usually found her own way through. At meals, Honoria spoke around her. She asked Edwin about paper prices, asked Ada about the judge, and instructed the cook to serve smaller portions because an unexpected person was at table. She never addressed Nell by name. Nell responded by becoming nearly soundless. Her spoon did not touch the bowl. Her shoes did not scrape. She folded her napkin into a square so small it vanished beneath her hand. Ada recognized the skill. She had spent the first years of her marriage acquiring it. When Ada came to Bellweather as Thomas's bride, she was 24 and the daughter of a bookbinder from Dayton. Her father possessed talent, debts, and no useful family name. Honoria had expected Thomas to marry the bank president's niece. She received Ada with perfect courtesy and spent the next decade demonstrating the distance between welcome and belonging. Ada's work was admired when presented as Thomas's. Her taste was praised when guests assumed Honoria had directed it. At Sunday dinner, Honoria asked Ada to carve because her hands were capable, then discussed business as though those hands had no mind attached. Thomas noticed some of it. He kissed Ada's ink-stained fingers in private and told her that his mother had been obliged to become hard after his father died. He promised that once Edwin settled and the shop expanded, he and Ada would take a house of their own. They never did. First came the pregnancy and the loss. Then a winter of headaches, whispered consultations, and Honoria entering without knocking. 2 years later came another pregnancy that ended before Ada had told anyone but Thomas. After that, doctors spoke of rest. Honoria spoke of acceptance. Thomas stopped speaking of houses. Ada had believed his silence meant relief. Perhaps he had discovered that a wife who could bind books but not bear children was useful enough where she stood. On Thursday afternoon, Nell made her first serious mistake. She was carrying a tray of newly printed calling cards from the drying rack when Edwin entered backward through the press-room door, laughing at something a salesman had said. He struck the tray with his elbow. Cards scattered across the floor. One corner slid beneath the treadle press and caught a smear of black ink. Edwin looked down. The cards belonged to Mrs. Josiah Bell, who had rejected 2 proofs because the flourishes on the J appeared common. He demanded to know why a county child was handling paid work. Nell bent at once to gather the cards. Edwin caught her shoulder and pulled her upright. He said thieves began by making themselves useful. Then he ordered Mr. Pike to check the type cabinets and Ada to examine the cash drawer. Ada saw the bruise on Nell's wrist before she saw the fear in her face. She told Edwin he had knocked the tray himself. The salesman shifted his weight. Mr. Pike continued setting type, though every movement had ceased behind his spectacles. Edwin said accidents followed disorder. Since Nell's arrival, the shop had been full of whispers, county officers, and private papers. He suggested that Ada's judgment was again becoming unreliable. Again. The word was for the room. It invited the men to remember stories they had never been told but might enjoy completing. Ada stepped between Edwin and the child. She said the damaged cards would be reprinted and charged against Edwin's drawing account. He laughed. Ada did not. She reminded him that she owned half the business and supervised finishing. Nell worked under her authority. If Edwin touched the child again, the county agent would hear which Mercer had created disorder. The salesman's eyes found the ceiling. One pressboy smiled into his sleeve. Edwin released Nell. The humiliation did not roar through Bellweather. It traveled in quieter ways. By supper, Honoria knew. By Friday morning, Mrs. Cobb at the millinery asked Ada whether grief had made her charitable or merely eccentric. At noon, the minister's wife visited the shop and advised prayer before permanent decisions. That evening, 2 women from the church relief committee arrived with a basket for Nell and questions about Ruth. Was she married? Had she been sober? Why had Thomas visited her? Ada returned the unopened basket. On Saturday, she took Nell to the county infirmary to collect Ruth's remaining possessions. They traveled in a hired cab because Honoria refused the shop wagon. Low clouds pressed over fields stripped for winter. Nell sat with Ruth's parcel on her knees and counted fence posts, losing her place whenever they passed a bare elm. The infirmary stood beyond the fairgrounds, a long brick building with narrow windows. Its matron, Mrs. Beach, received them in an office warmed past comfort. She had kept one small trunk because no one knew where to send it. Ruth Weller's whole life fit inside. There were 2 work dresses, carefully mended, a pair of scissors wrapped in flannel, a Catholic prayer card, 3 spoons, a packet of dried lavender, and a tin cylinder no longer than Ada's hand. Its lid was punched with tiny holes. When Nell turned a key at one end, something inside clicked but did not play. Nell said it had once made music. Her mother called it the little sky. At night, if a candle was placed behind it, points of light appeared on the wall as the cylinder turned. Thomas had repaired it twice. The last time, he had taken it away for nearly a month and returned it with a new tune, though Ruth refused to say what the tune meant. Ada held the cylinder near the window. Between the punched stars ran a pattern of larger openings, almost hidden among them. She could not understand it without light. This, not the paper theater, had been Ruth's most guarded possession. Nell had tried to bring it to the shop, but Mrs. Beach would not release the trunk without county permission. The matron watched Ada examine it. She said Ruth had arrived at the infirmary 8 weeks earlier with consumption already advanced. She had refused to give a husband's name. Weller, she finally admitted, belonged to an older woman who had once employed her. No marriage certificate had been found. Nell's face remained still. This information was not new to her. Mrs. Beach added that Ruth had asked repeatedly for Honoria Mercer, not Thomas. Ada looked up. The matron was certain. Ruth had asked for Mrs. Honoria Mercer of Mercer Printing. Mrs. Beach herself sent 2 notices. Neither received an answer. Nell stared at the tin cylinder. She said her mother never told her that. Ada asked whether Honoria had visited. Mrs. Beach replied that no Mercer came until Ada. The office seemed to contract around the little trunk. Ada thought of Honoria's birthday cake, the silver vase, and the careful hand folding the paper queen until its body broke. She asked to see the notices. Mrs. Beach had kept copies in the outgoing book, but Ada stopped herself before requesting them. A hidden ledger or preserved letter could prove that notices had been sent, but it could not explain why. She needed living truth, not columns and dates. She asked whether Ruth had spoken of her childhood. The matron said very little. Ruth was born somewhere near Bellweather and raised in a home in Cincinnati. She worked in hotels from the age of 15. She possessed good manners, fine stitching, and an education slightly better than her position. During fever, she sometimes called herself by another name. Honor, not Honoria. Honor. On the ride home, Nell did not count fence posts. She held the broken music cylinder beneath her shawl. Ada watched the child's profile. The nose was Ruth's, presumably. The chin belonged to no one Ada knew. But when Nell looked displeased, her left eyebrow rose before the right. Thomas had done the same. At the shop, Honoria was waiting beside the display counter. Her gaze went immediately to the tin cylinder. She asked where Ada had found it. Ada said it belonged to Ruth. Honoria extended her hand and ordered Nell to give it to her. Nell drew back. For the first time since entering Mercer & Son, the child openly refused. Honoria's cane struck the tile once. Ada stepped beside Nell. She asked why the cylinder mattered. Honoria said it had been stolen from her family many years before. Nell clutched it harder. Ada asked who had stolen it. Honoria looked at the child's face for a long moment. Her expression held anger, fear, and something that might once have been tenderness before pride starved it. Then she said a name Ada had never heard. Lucy Vale. She said Lucy Vale had been a servant in the Mercer household before Thomas was born. She had taken the cylinder and disappeared. From the composing room came the sharp sound of type spilled across a floor. Mr. Pike stood in the doorway. The color had drained from his weathered face. He said Honoria was lying. The press room went silent. Mr. Pike had spoken loudly enough for the press boys, the bookkeeper, and 2 customers at the front counter to hear. He looked as startled as anyone. In 37 years at Mercer & Son, Amos Pike had contradicted Honoria in private perhaps twice. No one remembered him doing it before witnesses. Honoria told Edwin to close the shop. He hurried the customers out, turned the sign, and dismissed the boys early. Mr. Pike remained by his type case. Ada kept one hand on Nell's shoulder. The child held the music cylinder beneath her shawl so tightly that the punched tin pressed marks into her palm. Honoria led them upstairs to the front parlor. The room had scarcely changed since Ada first entered it as Thomas's bride. Horsehair chairs faced one another across a Turkish carpet. The mantel held a marble clock that ran 6 minutes fast. On the wall hung portraits of dead Mercers, all painted with the same grave mouth whether they possessed it in life or not. Honoria lowered herself into the chair beneath her husband's portrait and ordered Mr. Pike to explain his accusation. The old compositor removed his spectacles. He said Lucy Vale had not been a servant. She had been a midwife. In the summer of 1858, before Honoria married Josiah Mercer, Lucy came to the Vale farm outside Bellweather and remained 3 weeks. Honoria was 25. Her father told neighbors she had gone to Cleveland to nurse an aunt. There was no aunt in Cleveland. Honoria's face became almost peaceful. Complete exposure, Ada realized, could resemble calm. Once the storm had broken, there was no need to keep watching the sky. Mr. Pike knew because he had driven Lucy to the farm. He was 17, apprenticed to Honoria's father, who then owned the town's only newspaper. He had also driven Lucy away at night. She carried a carpet bag and an infant girl wrapped in a summer cloak. Nell's fingers tightened on Ada's sleeve. Honoria said a boy's recollection after 44 years was not evidence. Mr. Pike agreed. Then he pointed to the tin cylinder. He had made it. As an apprentice, he cut the tin from a damaged tea can and punched the stars with typesetter's awls. Honoria had asked for it during the weeks at the farm. She wanted something that would cast light on the ceiling above a cradle. Pike built a small turning mechanism from clock scraps and fitted a comb that played 6 uncertain notes. The tune was meant to be a hymn, though no one could ever recognize which one. When Lucy left, Honoria placed the little sky inside the cloak. She did not look at Nell while he spoke. Ada asked the question that had already filled the room. Was Ruth the infant? Honoria said she did not know. Mr. Pike said she did. Years later, Thomas found Lucy Vale in Cincinnati while delivering a press part. Lucy had kept the child, naming her Ruth. Before she died, she told Thomas who Ruth's mother was and gave him the cylinder. Thomas returned it to Ruth after repairing the mechanism. He showed Pike the birthmark on Ruth's shoulder because it matched Honoria's. He also showed him a baptismal ribbon embroidered with the initials H.V., cut from Honoria's own christening gown. Honoria rose so cleaned her cane fell. She said Thomas had no right. The force in her voice shocked Nell backward. Ada understood then that the worst wound was not the child born in secrecy, it was the son who had learned. Honoria had built her life from discipline, widowhood, business skill, and public service. She had survived a marriage to a man who counted affection as weakness and survived his death by making herself indispensable. Thomas's knowledge had returned her to 25, frightened and powerless on a farm, while her father arranged the disappearance of her baby. But fear did not explain the notices left unanswered. It did not excuse the queen crushed in her pocket or the child sent into rain. Ada asked where the queen was. Honoria's gaze moved to the fire. The parlor grate contained only gray ash and one curled scrap edged in blue. Nell made no sound. Her face simply emptied. Ada had seen sorrow take many forms. She had seen men shout over a coffin and women polish a stove until their knuckles bled. Nell's grief was subtraction. Each loss removed some visible part of her until only endurance remained. Ada went to the grate. The scrap disintegrated when she touched it. Mr. Pike said the theater might not be lost. Thomas had printed at least 2 sets. He had cut the plates himself after hours. One set went to Ruth. The other remained unfinished in the shop. Edwin, who had been standing near the door, asked why company materials had been used for a private amusement. Even then, with a hidden sister and her orphaned child made real in the room, his first instinct was ownership. Mr. Pike looked tired. He said Thomas paid for every sheet. Edwin demanded receipts. Ada told him to be quiet. He obeyed, not because she spoke loudly, but because she had never before spoken to him as Honoria did. Nell stepped toward the old woman. Ada felt her leave, but did not stop her. The child asked whether Honoria was her grandmother. Honoria stared at the marble clock. She said blood alone did not make a family. It might have been wisdom in another mouth. In hers, it was a refusal. Nell nodded once. Then she placed the tin cylinder on the carpet between them. She said it belonged to Honoria, if that was what Honoria wanted. The gesture broke something in Ada that accusation had not. A child who owned 4 useful possessions was surrendering the one her mother had guarded because she would not beg to be claimed. Ada picked up the cylinder and put it back into Nell's hands. She said it had been given to a baby, carried through a lifetime, and passed to that baby's daughter. No one else had a better right. Honoria looked at Ada with naked fury. She warned that if Ada continued, she would divide the business, sell her interest, and force an accounting. Edwin moved as if he had been expecting this opening. Ada had feared those words for 4 years. Mercer & Son was her income, her home, and the last living shape of her marriage. If Honoria sold, Ada might lose all 3. The law recognized her half-interest, but division could devour value in legal fees and bad will. Edwin had friends at the bank. Honoria had friends everywhere. Nell whispered that she could go to Marlowe. Ada turned toward her. The child's willingness to vanish settled the question. Ada told Honoria to do what she believed her name required. Nell would remain until the judge decided. Honoria sent Edwin for her lawyer. By Monday morning, Bellweather possessed 7 versions of the story. In one, Thomas had fathered Nell. In another, Ada had invented the child to seize the shop. A third gave Honoria a secret marriage to a traveling actor. The Bellweather record, printed on Mercer presses but edited by a man who disliked Edwin, published only that a guardianship matter involving a prominent family would be heard Tuesday. That small notice brought more attention than a full article. Customers found reasons to linger. Women came for calling cards they did not need. Men collected bills in person. At church, the pew behind the Mercers remained empty. though every other pew filled early. Honoria did not attend. Ada took Nell to the smaller Catholic church Ruth had sometimes visited. They sat at the back. Ada was Methodist by upbringing and uncertain when to kneel, but no one questioned them. After Mass, an elderly woman pressed a holy card into Nell's hand and said she remembered Ruth from the Franklin House laundry. She remembered Thomas, too. He brought books for the kitchen girls and never stayed alone with any of them. It was the first public mercy anyone had offered Thomas's memory. On Monday afternoon, Ada visited Judge Caleb Morris at the courthouse. She found his clerk first and submitted her petition for temporary guardianship. She listed her age, income, property interest, and relationship to Nell by marriage if Honoria's maternity could be shown. She did not claim experience she lacked. The clerk asked whether Ada sought the child because she had no children of her own. Ada replied that absence was not a motive. It was merely a fact. He looked embarrassed and bent over the form. When she returned to the shop, Edwin's new press contract lay open on the front counter. He had invited representatives from Cincinnati to witness the installation the following week. A broadside announcing the event named Edwin as managing proprietor and Honoria as founder's widow. Ada's name appeared nowhere. She carried the proof into the composing room and set it before him. Edwin said bindery work did not belong on a list of officers. Ada reminded him that half of Mercer & Son belonged to her. He replied that ownership and leadership were different matters. She took a blue pencil and drew a line through the entire announcement. For years she had corrected margins, spelling, spacing, and broken type, while leaving the larger falsehoods untouched. This time she wrote beneath the title, Ada Mercer, co-proprietor and director of binding. Edwin said Honoria would never approve it. Ada answered that Honoria was welcome to remove her name from her own half of the copies. Mr. Pike coughed into his fist. It might have concealed a laugh. That evening, he led Ada and Nell to the attic above the press room. Dust lay thick between discarded frames, broken chairs, and bundles of election posters. Against the rear wall stood a flat wooden case no deeper than a valise. Thomas's initials were burned into the handle. Ada had seen the case once. After his funeral, Edwin said it contained obsolete plates. The lock had rusted. Mr. Pike worked it open with oil and a screwdriver. Inside lay the unfinished paper theater. There was a stage front printed to resemble red velvet, 3 forests, a kitchen, a ship on a painted sea, a palace stair, and dozens of figures wrapped in tissue. The colors remained vivid where the lid had shut out light. A wolf waited beside a miller's daughter. A king held a loaf of bread. A woman in a blue dress wore a crown but had no printed face. Beneath the figures rested a thin wooden floor cut with slots. On its underside, Thomas had written 3 names in pencil: Ada, Ruth, Nell. Beside Ada's name was the word home. Beside Ruth's was sister. Beside Nell's was child. No sentence explained the 3. No date made them orderly. Yet Ada understood that Thomas had been trying to build a truth he could not speak inside his mother's house. Nell touched her own name. She asked whether Thomas had meant her to be Ada's child. Ada could not answer. Mr. Pike could. He said Thomas had gone to see a lawyer 2 weeks before the winter accident that killed him. He intended to bring Ruth and Nell to Bellweather, acknowledge Ruth as his sister, and ask Ada to help him give the girl a home while Ruth received treatment. Ada's hand closed around the edge of the case. 2 weeks before his death, Thomas had told her he was traveling to Columbus for a machinery order. He returned quiet and exhausted. That night he held her as he had not for years. Ada had mistaken tenderness for guilt. Now, in the dusty attic, she learned it had been hope. The guardianship hearing began at 10 on Tuesday morning. By 9:45, every bench in Judge Morris's small courtroom was occupied. The matter was technically private, but privacy in Bellweather depended less on law than on the social importance of the people being watched. Church ladies sat beside pressmen. Mrs. Cobb wore her best hat. The editor of the record leaned against the rear wall with a notebook closed in his hand, promising by that gesture to remember everything without appearing to report it. Ada entered with Nell and Mr. Sloane. The child wore a navy dress altered from one of Ada's, with the sleeves recut and the waist raised. Around her neck hung the key to the music cylinder on a green ribbon. She carried no paper figures. Ada had decided that Thomas's pencil marks belonged to Nell, not to public appetite. Honoria arrived through the judge's private corridor with Edwin and Mr. Lyle, the family lawyer. She wore black, and the pearl brooch shone in every formal Mercer portrait. Her eyes passed over Nell without stopping. Judge Morris had known the Mercers for 30 years. That did not make him comfortable. He cleaned his spectacles twice before asking Mr. Sloane to summarize. The county agent reported that Nell Weller was approximately 11 years old, that her mother was deceased, that no legal father or other acknowledged relative had been located, and that Ada Mercer had provided adequate temporary care. He also reported objections concerning Ada's health, employment demands, household conflict, and emotional motive. Emotional motive. Ada wondered what motive for taking in a grieving child would satisfy men who distrusted feeling and women who had been trained to hide it. Mr. Lyle called Dr. Horace Ballard. The doctor was old now, with a white beard yellowed near the mouth. He had attended Ada after her first loss. From a file he produced a note written 8 years earlier describing sleeplessness, weeping, refusal of food, and an episode in which Ada walked at night into the unused nursery and could not be persuaded to leave. The room listened greedily. Ada remembered that night only in pieces: a lamp smoking on the table, 3 folded shirts, Thomas sitting on the floor outside the door because Honoria had instructed him not to excite her. She had been ill with grief, not madness. But Bellweather had few words for a woman whose sorrow inconvenienced a household. Dr. Ballard admitted that he had not treated Ada for nervous trouble in 7 years. He admitted she had managed the bindery, kept accounts for her own department, and cared for Thomas during his final days after the accident. Still, he believed the arrival of a child could revive unhealthy fixation. Judge Morris asked whether love for a child was itself a fixation. Dr. Ballard replied that excess distinguished illness from affection. Ada saw several mothers on the benches straighten as if personally measured and found excessive. Edwin testified next. He described business disruption, damaged cards, arguments with customers that had not occurred, and Ada's threat to alter company announcements. He praised his sister-in-law's skill while doubting her temperament. It was a careful performance. He wanted the shop without appearing to want Ada harmed. Then Mr. Lyle called Honoria. She took the witness chair with one hand on her cane. Under ordinary circumstances, a woman of 70 might have seemed frail there. Honoria made the chair resemble a second throne. Mr. Lyle asked whether she believed Ada capable of providing a stable home. Honoria said Ada was industrious, moral, and kind. Each compliment narrowed the space before the blow. She then explained that kindness could become dangerous when it attempted to repair private disappointments through a vulnerable child. Ada had wanted children desperately. Providence denied them. A wise woman accepted Providence. An unwise one sought substitutes. Nell's hand found Ada's. Mr. Lyle asked whether Honoria claimed a blood relationship to Nell. The courtroom changed. People leaned without appearing to move. Honoria said no proven relationship existed. Ada looked at the pearl brooch. She looked at the green ribbon around Nell's neck. Between them lay 44 years of refusal. Mr. Lyle concluded that Nell should enter the Marlowe home until a disinterested family could be found. Judge Morris asked Nell whether she wished to speak. Mr. Sloane began to object that the child had endured enough, but Nell stood. Her voice was low. Those nearest bent forward, those farthest held their breath. She said Mrs. Ada had not asked her to call her mother. She had not asked Nell to be grateful. She had given her a room, work that was not a trick, and time to finish hard words. When Nell broke nothing, Mrs. Ada did not praise her for being invisible. When someone else knocked down the cards, Mrs. Ada told the truth. Judge Morris asked whether Nell wanted to remain with Ada. Nell said yes. Mr. Lyle asked whether Thomas Mercer had been her father. The question caused a murmur so ugly that Judge Morris struck the bench. Nell went white. She said Thomas had never asked her to call him anything but Mr. Mercer. Mr. Lyle asked what Ruth had told her about him. Nell said her mother called him brother once, when fever was high. The next morning she denied it. Honoria closed her eyes. Ada stood before the judge, invited her. She said the hearing had ceased to concern her fitness and had become another room in which adults placed their fear on a child. If the court wished to examine her home, income, health, or conduct, she would answer. But Nell would not be forced to defend her mother's honor against insinuations designed to protect people old enough to confess their own histories. Mr. Lyle objected. Judge Morris allowed Ada to continue. She did not expose Honoria, not then. She could have named the birthmark, the midwife, and Mr. Pike's memory. The room wanted that story. Ada saw hunger behind fans and folded hands. But Ruth had lived under other people's shame. Nell would not begin again beneath public curiosity if Ada could prevent it. Ada said only that evidence of a family connection was being examined and that Mr. Pike could testify privately. She asked for 30 days, not permanent custody. 30 days in which Nell could attend school, mourn her mother, and decide whether Bellweather was a place she wished to remain. Judge Morris recessed. In the corridor, women gathered around Honoria. Their voices were soft and urgent. Some offered support. Others offered the more dangerous gift of sympathy, which assumes the recipient has already fallen. Edwin argued with Mr. Lyle near the stairs. Ada took Nell to an empty records room. The child sat on a wooden chest and stared at her shoes. She asked what providence meant. Ada gave the church answer first, the care and direction of God. Nell asked whether God had told Honoria that Ada could not have a child. Ada said no. It was the clearest religious statement she had ever made. The judge returned after 40 minutes. He granted Ada temporary guardianship for 30 days. Nell was to attend school, Mr. Sloane would visit weekly, and no member of the household could remove her without court permission. The question of permanent guardianship would be heard in January. Relief did not feel like joy. It felt like the moment after lifting a heavy board when the body still expects the weight. Outside the courthouse, snow had begun. Fine grains moved sideways across the square. Nell put her tongue out once to catch them and immediately looked ashamed of childishness. Ada pretended not to notice, then did the same. The child's laugh was brief and startled. It was the first time Ada heard it. They walked home rather than hire a cab. At Mercer & Son, the front rooms were locked. Honoria had gone to Edwin's house. Her trunks followed that afternoon. Before leaving, she removed the family silver, 3 portraits, the marble clock, and the locked cabinet. She left the birthday vase. On the parlor mantel, where the clock had stood, lay the half-burned scrap of the paper queen. Ada could not decide whether Honoria meant it as a threat, an apology, or rubbish she had overlooked. She placed it inside Thomas's green book. That night, the house sounded larger without Honoria's cane. Nell carried the tin cylinder into Ada's room. Mr. Pike had repaired the spring, but the tune remained broken. Ada lit a candle and set it behind the punched metal shade. Nell turned the key. The cylinder began to revolve. Stars moved across the sloped ceiling. Small lights climbed the wallpaper, crossed the wardrobe, and passed over Ada's hands. Then the larger holes aligned. They did not form a constellation. They formed letters. Honor. The word appeared slowly, one bright fragment at a time, then dissolved among stars. Nell said that was the name her mother spoke in fever. Ada understood why Thomas had taken the cylinder for a month. He had altered it, preserving the name Ruth possessed before the world gave her another. Perhaps he planned to place it before Honoria, light the room, and make denial impossible without a single public word. He never had the chance. Nell turned the key again. Honor crossed the ceiling. Ada thought about the word. Honoria had spent her life guarding its public meaning while abandoning the person who carried its private one. The following Monday, Nell began school. Ada walked her 3 blocks to the brick schoolhouse. The principal, Miss Keene, was a practical woman with iron-gray hair and a chalk mark on her sleeve. She had received instructions from the judge and rumors from everyone else. She asked Nell to read a paragraph and solve a column of sums, then placed her in the 4th-year room. Children stared. One boy whispered loudly that Nell's mother had worked in a hotel. A girl asked whether Ada had bought her from the county. Nell endured the morning. At noon, she did not come home. Ada found her behind the woodshed, sitting on an upturned coal bucket. Her lunch pail was unopened. Nell said school was unnecessary. She could work full days in the bindery. She was old enough to earn her room. Ada sat beside her, though the bucket rim pressed through her skirt. She explained that the room was not wages. Breakfast was not wages. Reading in the evening was not wages. Nell did not need to balance every kindness before nightfall. The child looked unconvinced. Ada knew why. Ruth's life had taught her that unpaid debts were collected without warning. Ada made a different bargain. Nell would attend school. In return, she could work 2 afternoons a week in the bindery for 10 cents, entered openly in the wage book like any other helper. The rest belonged to the household, because she belonged to the household. Nell asked for how long. Ada said for as long as the court allowed, and longer if they both chose it. Nell returned to class. By December, their days acquired a shape. Ada woke at 6, heated water, and burned the first oatmeal less often. Nell fed the alley cat before eating herself. They opened the bindery at 8. At 3:30, a small figure appeared at the shop door with school books strapped together. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Nell folded signatures or swept paper scraps. On other days, she did sums at the back table while presses shook the floor beneath her elbows. Nothing about it resembled the motherhood Ada had imagined at 26. There were no soft infants, embroidered gowns, or admiring visitors. There were wet stockings on the stove, arguments over penmanship, nightmares Nell denied, and a habit of hiding bread in the pillowcase. There was the morning Nell lied about breaking the wash basin, and the evening Ada spoke too sharply, then apologized. There was fear on both sides. It was ordinary. That ordinariness healed a place in Ada that pity never reached. Yet the town did not let them forget January. Edwin persuaded the bank to delay the press loan unless ownership was clarified. Suppliers began asking for cash. 2 commercial customers moved their work to Dayton after hearing the Mercers might dissolve. Honoria, from Edwin's house, notified Ada through Mr. Lyle that she intended to sell her half-interest on the first business day of the new year. Ada calculated through 3 nights. She could not buy Honoria's share. Even if she mortgaged her interest and sold Thomas's watch, Edwin could outbid her with bank support. If an outsider purchased, Ada might retain a legal half but lose practical control. The bindery could be closed. The rooms could be sold. Every secure thing she had offered Nell stood on a foundation Honoria could split. On Christmas Eve, Ada found a small package on her desk. Nell had used wasteboard and marbled end paper to make a box. Inside lay a new paper queen, drawn in pencil and colored with evening violet scraped from Thomas's dried jar and softened with oil. The figure's crown was crooked. Her hands were too large. Her face had Ada's straight nose and Nell's uneven eyebrows. On the back, Nell had printed one word with loose type: home. Ada sat at the cutting table until the gaslights blurred. For years she had believed a home was something other people granted: a husband, a mother-in-law, a doctor, a judge. Nell's paper queen held no deed and carried no family name. Still, she stood upright in the wooden stage because a child had cut her tabs wide enough. Ada placed the queen in the center slot. Then she opened the shop books and began to plan how Mercer and Son might survive without Honoria Mercer. Ada's plan began with work Edwin had always considered beneath the Mercer name. The large commercial orders were impressive, but they required expensive paper, long credit, and a press Mercer and Son did not yet own. The bindery paid in smaller, steadier ways. Schools needed copybooks. Lawyers needed briefs stitched. Families brought worn Bibles, cookbooks, atlases, and albums, whose value could not be measured by their covers. Shopkeepers needed labels in hundreds, not thousands. Women who sold preserves, soap, dress patterns, or remedies from their kitchens needed modest cards and wrappers that Edwin ignored because they entered through the back door carrying coins instead of bank drafts. Ada made a list of every such customer from the previous 5 years. On the day after Christmas, she visited them. She walked through sleet with samples under her arm. She offered clear prices, short runs, reliable dates, and bindings strong enough to outlast fashion. She did not trade on Thomas's memory or apologize for being a woman alone. By dusk, she had orders for 300 seed envelopes, 50 music folios, a new menu for a German boarding house, and 200 labels for Mrs. Alvarez's quince preserves. The orders would not buy Honoria's half. They would keep the gas lit. Mr. Pike brought a second list. Without telling Ada, he had spoken to former apprentices now working across the county. 2 agreed to send overflow typesetting. Frank Beale offered to postpone part of his wages if needed. The press boys began saving clean offcuts rather than throwing them into the scrap bin. Ada refused any plan built on unpaid labor, but the offers changed her understanding of the shop. For years, Honoria had described Mercer and Son as a monument maintained by the family. Ada saw now that it was a living arrangement held together by many hands, most absent from the sign. She ordered a new proof. Mercer Printing and Bindery, underneath in smaller type, Ada Mercer, proprietor. She had no legal right yet to claim the whole. She printed only 1 copy and kept it in her desk. Edwin came on December 29th with Mr. Lyle and an appraiser. They measured the presses, counted cases of type, examined paper stock, and valued the building room by room. Nell followed them silently until the appraiser opened the little chamber without knocking. Then she stood in the doorway and told him it was occupied. He apologized and closed the door. Edwin did not. He said the room belonged to the property, not to Nell. He said that after the sale, arrangements would change. Ada asked him to discuss business downstairs. He remained where he was. Perhaps he wanted the child to hear. He explained that Honoria's interest would be offered first to Ada under the partnership agreement. If Ada failed to purchase within 10 days, Edwin would buy it. As majority manager, he would convert the upper floor to offices. Ada might rent one rear room if she remained employed. Nell's face took on the blankness Ada feared. Ada told Edwin the conversation was over. He looked toward the paper figures on the washstand. The new queen stood among them. He picked it up by the crown. Nell crossed the room before Ada could stop her and struck his hand. The queen fell unharmed. Edwin caught Nell's wrist, this time hard enough to make her cry out. Ada seized his sleeve and forced his fingers open. She did not remember deciding. One moment Edwin held the child, the next Ada had him against the doorframe with his cuff twisted in her fist. Mr. Lyle stepped between them. The appraiser stared at the floor. Edwin called Nell a little savage. Ada told him he would never enter the rooms again without permission. If he touched Nell once more, she would bring charges and invite every newspaper in the county to the hearing. It was not composure. Her voice shook. Her hair had loosened. She looked, she suspected, exactly like the unstable woman Dr. Ballard described. But Edwin backed away. After they left, Nell retrieved the queen. Her wrist bore 4 pale marks that soon darkened. She apologized. Ada asked what for. For making Ada angry. For causing the shop to be sold. For striking a gentleman. Ada knelt, bringing their faces level. She said Edwin's conduct belonged to Edwin. Honoria's sale belonged to Honoria. The old mistake in the Mercer family was teaching women and children to carry the shame of whoever had power over them. They would not repeat it. Nell listened, but belief came slowly. It would have to be taught by repetition, not speech. That night the child wet the bed. She tried to strip the sheets before Ada woke and scrub them in cold water at the sink. Ada found her at 5, shivering in her nightdress, hands red from soap. Nell expected disgust or punishment. Ada felt both fatigue and irritation, honest feelings at that hour, but neither belonged on a child already ashamed. They remade the bed together. Ada warmed milk. Nell admitted she had dreamed of the Marlowe train. In the dream, every car was filled with paper people who had no faces, and Edwin tore their tabs off before they could stand. Ada slept in the chair beside her until morning. On New Year's Eve, a messenger arrived from Edwin's house. Honoria had collapsed after supper. Ada went at once. She left Nell with Mrs. Alvarez, who lived above her preserve shop with 3 daughters and regarded scandal as a poor excuse for neglecting a child. Honoria lay in Edwin's best bedroom beneath a crocheted coverlet. Dr. Ballard called the episode a weakness of the heart. She had not suffered a seizure, but her pulse was irregular and she must avoid agitation. Edwin met Ada in the corridor. He said the sale would proceed. His mother had signed the necessary instruction before collapsing. Ada asked to see her. He refused. From the bedroom, Honoria's voice ordered him aside. Illness had reduced her volume, not her command. Ada entered alone. For the first time in their acquaintance, Honoria wore her hair in a loose gray braid. Without collar, cameo, and upright chair, she looked smaller than the authority she had exercised. A blue vein moved at her temple. On the table beside the bed rested the silver birthday vase, filled with white hothouse roses Edwin could not afford. Honoria asked whether Nell had been removed. Ada said no. The older woman turned her face toward the wall. She said the sale would end the disorder. Ada asked whether disorder meant Ruth. Honoria closed her eyes. Ada had prepared accusations during the walk from the shop. None survived the sight of that loosened braid. Pity came, unwelcome but real. It did not erase anger. It merely made anger more precise. Ada said Ruth had died asking for her. Honoria answered that Ruth had asked before, many years earlier. Thomas brought her to Bellweather in 1892 and arranged a meeting at a hotel outside town. Ruth was 34, already worn by work, with the same mark on her shoulder. She wanted no money. She wanted to know why she had been given away. Honoria had told her the truth she could bear. A father who threatened, a mother who had no legal or financial power, a marriage prospect that would vanish if the child became known. Ruth asked whether Honoria had ever searched for her. Honoria had not. She sent money through Lucy Vale once a year until Lucy moved. After that, she let silence do what distance had failed to finish. Ruth asked whether Thomas knew. Honoria begged her not to tell him. Ruth agreed, but Thomas had already discovered enough from Lucy. Ada asked why Thomas hid it from her. Honoria said because she made him choose. If he exposed the secret, she would deny Ruth, dismiss Mr. Pike, and dissolve the business. She told Thomas that Ada's health could not endure public shame. She used Ada's grief as a lock on her son's conscience. Thomas tried other ways. He helped Ruth move from hotel work to dressmaking. He paid Nell's school fees for a year. He built the paper theater because Nell was frightened of the dark kitchen where Ruth worked nights. When Ruth's illness worsened, he planned to bring them into the family despite Honoria's threat. Then the delivery wagon overturned on the river road. Thomas lived 2 days. Ada had sat beside him through both. He drifted in and out asking for paper. She thought he wished to alter his will. Honoria told the doctor to keep him quiet. Near the end, he said Ruth's name once. Honoria claimed he had asked for truth. Ada, exhausted, heard only a sound. All these years she had believed his final unfinished word belonged to another woman he might have loved. It did belong to another woman, his sister. Ada moved to the window. Edwin's garden lay under snow. Gaslight from the street shone on bare lilac stems. She asked whether Thomas had wanted Nell placed with her. Honoria said yes. The answer entered without drama. No music, no revelation of light. Just one tired word from an old woman in bed. Yes. Thomas believed Ada's sorrow came not only from childlessness, but from being told to bury every form of mothering with the infants she lost. He believed she and Nell might choose one another. He was not certain. He did not presume. That was why the wooden stage said home, sister, child, instead of wife, daughter, duty. He meant to ask. Ada gripped the window sash. She wanted to forgive him. She wanted to rage that he had let Honoria's threat keep truth from their marriage. Both desires were honest. Death did not make silence noble. Honoria said Thomas had been weak where women were concerned. Ada turned. She said Thomas had been weak where his mother was concerned. There was a difference. Honoria accepted the blow without flinching. Ada asked why she had ignored the infirmary notices. The older woman looked toward the white roses. She said she went as far as the infirmary gate. The first notice arrived 3 weeks before Ruth died. Honoria hired a cab, rode there, and saw Nell through a downstairs window reading beside the bed. The child lifted one eyebrow exactly as Thomas did. Honoria became frightened that love might still be possible and therefore still capable of demanding something. She ordered the driver home. The second notice she burned. Ada understood fear. She did not accept it as absolution. She told Honoria that the permanent hearing was in 12 days. If Honoria spoke the truth privately to the judge, Nell's family connection could be established without public spectacle. Ada would not ask for affection or a grandmother's role, only truth. Honoria refused. She would not stain Josiah Mercer's name, Thomas's memory, or Edwin's prospects for a child who might leave as soon as she was old enough. Ada said children did leave. That did not make loving them a bad investment. Honoria's mouth tightened. The language of investment had reached her, though the meaning had not. Ada left the room. At the foot of the stairs, Edwin blocked her path. He accused her of upsetting a sick woman. Ada said Honoria had been upset since 1858 and the household had simply mistaken control for recovery. Outside, church bells began ringing the new year. Ada walked back through snow. In windows along Main Street, families raised cups, wound clocks, and kissed beneath paper garlands. She had entered the year believing she needed to save a shop in order to keep a child. By the time she reached Mrs. Alvarez's door, she knew the order was reversed. She would save what could become a home. If the shop could not follow, she would let the name go. The first business day of 1903 began with a frozen water pipe. Ada and Nell carried kettles down 2 flights of stairs while Mr. Pike warmed the bend with rags. At 8, the gas pressure failed. At 9, a delivery boy dropped a parcel of damp stock in the alley. By 10, Ada had forgotten that Honoria's share was formally for sale until the bank manager arrived. Mr. Pritchard removed his hat, but not his overcoat. He explained that Edwin had submitted an offer equal to the appraised value, financed partly through Bellweather First National. Under the partnership agreement, Ada had until 5 o'clock on January 10th to match it. The amount was $8,400. Ada possessed $612 in savings. Her half-interest could secure perhaps $3,000 if a lender accepted the risk. Thomas's watch, the green poetry book, her jewelry, and the furniture together might bring $200. Arithmetic stripped courage of romance. Mr. Pritchard advised her to accept employment under Edwin. He spoke kindly, which made the limits of his imagination harder to challenge. He said a woman in her position should value continuity. Ada asked whose continuity he meant. He had no prepared answer. When he left, Nell emerged from beneath the cutting table. She had been retrieving dropped awls and heard everything. She said they could go somewhere else. Her mother had moved often. Rooms were not hard to find if one accepted the top floor and carried water. Ada did not tell her that rooms were easy to find for one respectable widow, and harder for a widow accompanied by a child of uncertain name. She said only that moving was possible. Possibility was not disaster. That afternoon, Mrs. Alvarez came for her labels. She paid in full, though the order was only half complete. The next morning, the German boarding house keeper did the same. On Sunday, Miss Keene asked Ada to bind 50 school readers and offered the year's repair budget in advance. Ada suspected coordination. It became undeniable when 12 women entered the shop together on Monday. They represented a dressmaker, a baker, 2 boarding houses, a midwife, a music teacher, the Colored Women's Reading Circle on Walnut Street, the Catholic Altar Society, and 3 farm households whose preserves traveled as far as Columbus. Mrs. Alvarez spoke for them. They wanted price sheets, labels, recipe leaflets, concert programs, and small catalogs. They also wanted ownership certificates. Ada thought she had misheard. Mrs. Alvarez had consulted a lawyer in Dayton. A group could form a cooperative association, purchase Honoria's half, and lease operating control to Ada. Each woman would subscribe according to means. Profits after expenses would repay shares. The name Mercer need not remain. The proposal was daring, imperfect, and not yet large enough. Their pledges totaled $2,700. Ada asked why they would risk savings on her. Mrs. Alvarez corrected her. They were risking savings on work they already bought. Edwin ignored them because their orders were small and their businesses conducted from kitchens, rented rooms, and back counters. Ada treated small work as real work. They preferred a printer who understood that 50 honest labels could matter more to a widow than 5,000 handbills mattered to a politician. Miss Keene added that women were always told to wait until their enterprises became respectable before receiving support. Respectability generally arrived after support, not before. Nell sat by the window, pretending to sort board. Her eyes did not leave Ada. Ada accepted the proposal on one condition. No woman would pledge rent money, food money, or property she could not lose. The group agreed to meet that evening at the schoolhouse. News traveled. By Tuesday, subscriptions reached 3,600. Mr. Pike pledged 500 saved over 20 years. Frank Beale offered 200. The editor of the Record invested 100 and printed a short notice about the Bellweather Cooperative Print Association without naming the Mercer dispute. A black undertaker named Isaiah Freeman, whose funeral cards Ada had repaired after Edwin refused his custom, pledged 300 and brought commitments from 3 churches. The bank still refused a loan. Mr. Pritchard said the subscribers lacked concentrated capital. Edwin had property and a male guarantor. Ada had goodwill, which banks praised in speeches and omitted from security. On January 8th, Ada traveled to Dayton with Mrs. Alvarez and the cooperative lawyer. They visited 2 banks and 1 private lender. All admired the order book. None would advance the remaining sum without Ada pledging her existing half, the building, and a life insurance policy she did not possess. They returned after dark. Nell waited at the station with Mr. Pike. Snow had turned to rain. The child ran beside Ada, then stopped herself before embracing her. Ada opened her arms. Nell stepped into them stiffly. After a moment, the stiffness left. Ada had lost the shop, or nearly. Yet on the wet station platform, with steam drifting beneath the lamps and Nell's forehead against her shoulder, she felt less defeated than she had in Honoria's parlor with every comfort intact. On January 9th, a man named Samuel Price entered Mercer & Son. He was about 50, broad-shouldered, with a scar crossing his jaw and printer's ink on the side of his hand. Ada knew his name. Price owned a small newspaper and job shop in Marlow. Edwin called him a radical because his paper supported mine inspectors, women's property rights, and public schools for children employed in factories. Mr. Price asked to see the cooperative books. He spent 2 hours examining orders, equipment values, wages, and the partnership agreement. Then he offered a loan of $2,500 at 6%, secured only by the cooperative shares and Ada's management contract. It was not enough. They remained 600 short. Ada thanked him but did not sign. That afternoon, a parcel arrived from Edward's house. Inside was the silver birthday vase and a note in Mr. Lyle's hand stating that Honoria wished it sold for the benefit of the Marlowe Children's Home. The vase was worth perhaps $75. Nell asked whether it could be refused. Ada said yes. Instead, she carried it to the jeweler for appraisal. On the underside, hidden by tarnish, was the maker's mark of a Cincinnati silversmith and an engraved date, June 17, 1858. Honoria's birthday was in November. June 17th had been Ruth's birthday. The vase was not the business association's new gift. Honoria had displayed an old possession and allowed everyone to believe it new. Ada remembered the wrapping, the speech, Edwin's expression. He must not have known. Inside the narrow neck, something rattled. The jeweler removed the felt base. A roll of banknotes slid onto the counter. $600. No message accompanied it. Ada stared at the money. It could buy the shop. It could also buy Honoria's silence in a new form. The old woman had refused truth and offered capital, as if every human obligation could be converted into a sum. Mrs. Alvarez advised taking it. Mr. Pike said nothing. Nell touched the engraved date. She asked whether the money had belonged to her mother. No one knew. Ada carried the vase and money to Edwin's house. Honoria received her downstairs, wrapped in a dark shawl. She had regained some strength but leaned heavily on the cane. Edwin was at the bank. Ada placed the notes on the table. She asked their source. Honoria said she had saved them from her household allowance over many years. Ada asked why they were hidden in a vase marked with Ruth's birth date. Honoria looked at the engraving as if she had forgotten it remained. The vase had been given to her by Ruth's father, Daniel Harrow, a young law clerk who died of pneumonia before the baby was born. He knew about the pregnancy and wanted to marry her. Honoria's father refused. Daniel left $600 in trust with Honoria's father for the child. The money was never sent. Honoria found it among her father's papers after his death and hid it in the vase. She had kept Ruth's inheritance for 31 years after finding it. Ada felt anger rise again, clean and hot. Honoria said she could never locate Lucy Vale after 1871. Ada reminded her that Ruth came to Bellweather in 1892. Honoria's hand tightened on the shawl. By then, giving the money would have required admitting where it came from. She told herself Ruth might waste it, that Thomas's help was sufficient, that Nell would benefit later. Each year made the original theft easier to preserve and harder to name. Ada pushed the notes toward her. Honoria said the money legally belonged to Nell. Ada agreed. Therefore, it could not purchase a printing shop for Ada unless a court-appointed guardian decided that investment served Nell's interest. Ada would not begin motherhood by spending the child's inheritance to secure her own home. For the first time, Honoria looked ashamed rather than afraid. She asked what Ada intended. Ada said the money would be deposited in trust for Nell. The sale deadline would pass. Edwin would purchase the share. Ada would take whatever value remained in her half and start again elsewhere. Honoria stared toward the winter garden. She said Thomas would have taken the money. Ada replied that Thomas had been raised to believe Mercer's survival justified too much. She loved him. She would not repeat every error he might have made. Honoria asked whether Ada hated her. The question was so quiet that Ada almost mistook it for breath. She considered the years of small humiliation, the medical note, Ruth at the infirmary gate, and Nell's queen in the grate. Hatred would have been simple. What Ada felt was heavier and less satisfying. She said she no longer intended to organize her life around Honoria, even through hatred. Then she left the money on the table and walked back to the shop. At 4:50 on January 10th, Mr. Pritchard arrived to confirm that Ada had not matched Edwin's offer. At 4:53, Samuel Price entered behind him. He placed a revised loan agreement on the counter. The amount was $3,100. Ada asked what had changed. Price said he had mortgaged one of his 2 job presses and persuaded his sister to invest. He had heard that Ada refused to use a child's hidden inheritance. A manager who protected money when she needed it most, he believed, was a safer risk than land owned by a man who had never gone without. At 4:57, Ada signed. At 4:59, the cooperative tendered $8,400. Mr. Pritchard checked the clock twice. The marble clock had gone with Honoria. The plain wall clock above the counter kept honest time. Edwin arrived at 5:12. For once, punctuality failed him. Edwin did not accept defeat with silence. He accused the bank of conspiracy, Ada of misusing confidential information, and Samuel Price of predatory interference. He threatened injunctions. Mr. Lyle read the partnership agreement and advised him to threaten less in public. Honoria's share transferred to the cooperative 3 days later. Ada retained her half. The subscribers held the other through the association. She signed a 10-year management agreement that required open books, fair wages, quarterly reports, and 1 vote per member regardless of investment. Mrs. Alvarez insisted on the final provision. Mr. Pite called it a revolution conducted with better punctuation than most. The new sign went up on January 14th. Bellweather Printing and Bindery. Ada's name appeared on the window, not above everyone else's. Nell watched from the curb while the sign painter filled the final letter. Beneath the business name, he added in smaller gold leaf, cooperatively owned. Some townspeople laughed. Others predicted failure before spring. Orders continued to arrive. Ada should have felt safe. Instead, on the eve of the permanent guardianship hearing, Mr. Sloane brought a man to the shop. He introduced himself as Owen Weller. Nell dropped the bundle she was carrying. The man was 40 or perhaps younger, with a laborer's shoulders gone narrow beneath a good coat borrowed or recently bought. A healed cut pulled one corner of his upper lip. He held his hat in both hands. His eyes were the same pale gray as Nell's. He said he was Ruth's husband and Nell's father. The shop sounds continued around them for several seconds. Then Mr. Pike signaled the pressman, and the cylinder slowed to silence. Nell backed against the counter. Ada asked Mr. Sloane whether the claim had been verified. The county agent possessed a marriage certificate from Indiana dated 1890 and a baptism record naming Owen Weller as Nell's father. Both appeared genuine. Owen had been working in lumber camps in Michigan. A notice copied from the Bellweather record reached him through a former foreman. Ada looked at Nell. The child had never said her father was dead. She had said no father could be found. Owen stepped forward. Nell moved behind Ada. He stopped. He said he had not come to frighten her. He knew he had no right to expect welcome. He wanted to take his daughter home. Ada asked where home was. He had rented 2 rooms in Marlow and obtained work at Price's newspaper. Samuel Price, when questioned later, confirmed only that a compositor with experience had been hired that morning. He had not known Owen's connection to Nell. Mr. Sloane explained that a natural parent held priority unless proven unfit. The January hearing would be postponed for investigation. Nell said one word. No. Owen flinched. Mr. Sloane suggested they speak upstairs in private. Nell refused to move. Ada took her hand and led them to the bindery office, leaving the door open. Owen told his history without ornament. He and Ruth married when she was 29 and working in an Indianapolis hotel. He repaired roofs, set type when work was available, and drank whenever wages allowed. Nell was born the following year. For a time, he said, they were happy in the ordinary way poor people sometimes were, briefly and without witnesses. Then a scaffold fall injured his back. Laudanum from the doctor became whiskey when the medicine ended. He lost jobs. He struck Ruth once. Nell interrupted. It had not been once. Owen lowered his head. He corrected himself. More than once. Ruth left with Nell in 1896. She did not hide. She wrote twice to an address he abandoned. Owen followed neither letter. Shame, he said, became a convenient name for cowardice. He went north and told men he had no family. He had been sober 3 years. Nell said her mother waited 6. Owen accepted that too. Ada felt no sympathy she trusted. A man's regret often arrived after a woman had completed the suffering for him. Ruth had worked hotel laundries while ill. Nell had hidden bread. Owen had enjoyed the moral improvement of distance. He said Ruth's death changed what he could still repair. Ada replied that Ruth's death did not turn Nell into an opportunity for his redemption. Mr. Sloane looked down at his notebook. Owen said he knew. He asked for a chance to know his daughter. Nell gripped Ada's fingers until the knuckles hurt. She said she knew him. That was the reason for no. Owen left without touching her. For the rest of the day, Nell made errors. She folded a sheet against the grain, set a cup on a stack of proofs, and placed the lowercase p in the Q compartment. At supper, she said she was not hungry. At bedtime, she packed Ruth's trunk. Ada found her tying the lid with rope. Nell said the judge would send her away because fathers came before widows. She preferred to leave first. Ada sat on the floor beside the trunk. She wanted to promise that no judge, man, or law could take the child. The promise would have been comforting and false. She had begun to understand that care required truth even when truth offered no shelter. She said Owen had legal standing. He would be investigated. Nell's wishes would be heard. Ada would contest custody if she believed Nell unsafe. She would not disappear, surrender, or make the child fight alone. Nell asked whether Ada still wanted her now that she had a father. The question revealed the child's deepest arithmetic. If another person possessed a stronger claim, Ada's affection must reduce accordingly. Ada told her that wanting was not divided that way. She untied the trunk. The investigation lasted 3 weeks. Owen remained in Marlow. He worked daily, rented clean rooms, attended a temperance meeting, and submitted to every question. Former employers confirmed violence when drinking and reliability when sober. No complaint had followed him in 3 years. The law liked visible reform. It could count wages, rent, and months without arrest. It could not easily measure what happened inside Nell when footsteps paused outside a door. Owen sent no gifts. He wrote one note asking permission to visit. Ada showed it to Nell. She tore it in half, then saved both pieces in her primer. At school, rumors changed again. Nell was no longer Thomas Mercer's possible child. She was the daughter of a drunk returned for an inheritance. The $600 had somehow become $6,000 by the time boys repeated it in the yard. One afternoon, a boy snatched the green ribbon from Nell's neck. The cylinder key fell into snow. He shouted that it opened the Mercer safe. Nell struck him with her slate. Miss Keene sent both children to the principal's office and summoned Ada. The boy's father demanded expulsion. He owned the hardware store and 3 pews worth of confidence. He said county children carried bad breeding into decent classrooms. Ada asked whether he meant Owen's violence, Ruth's poverty, Honoria's abandonment, or his own son's cruelty. Bad breeding seemed widely distributed. Miss Keene hid a smile. Nell received 2 days suspension for striking with the slate. The boy received the same for theft and taunting. His father withdrew him in protest. At home, Ada told Nell that using the slate as a weapon was wrong. Nell asked whether letting him keep the key would have been right. Ada said no. They spent the evening discussing the difficult distance between surrender and harm. Neither found a perfect rule. Later, Nell admitted that Owen used to take Ruth's coins, then apologize with carved toys. He had carved the wolf in the paper theater after breaking the first one Thomas printed. Ruth kept it because poverty did not permit throwing away useful apologies. Ada fetched the wolf from the stage. Under lamplight, she saw that its body was printed, but its head had been cut separately from thin wood and painted gray. 2 forms of craft occupied one figure, Thomas's paper and Owen's carving. Nell hated the wolf. She also could not sleep if it was removed. Ada began to understand that children did not organize love according to the moral clarity adults demanded. Nell feared Owen, remembered him, and watched the street for him. All 3 could be true. Owen's first visit took place at Mr. Sloane's office. Ada sat at one side of the room. Nell sat beside her. Owen remained near the door. For 10 minutes no one spoke beyond greetings. Then Owen placed a small block of pear wood on the table. He did not offer it as a gift. He began carving while Mr. Sloane asked about school. Thin curls fell between his boots. Nell watched despite herself. By the end of the hour, a bird had emerged. It was rough, without wings or eyes. Owen left it on Mr. Sloane's desk. Nell refused to take it. At the second visit, the bird gained 1 wing. Owen spoke of the printing job and asked no forgiveness. At the third, Nell asked why the second wing was missing. Owen said he did not know whether he had earned the right to finish it. Ada disliked the answer. It placed an adult's moral completion in a child's hands. She told him so after Nell left the room. He studied the unfinished bird. Then he carved the second wing without waiting for permission. At the 4th visit, he gave the finished bird to Nell and said it asked nothing. She put it in her pocket. That evening, she set it beside Thomas's paper queen. The permanent hearing was rescheduled for March. Honoria received a summons to testify about Ruth's family relationship and inheritance. Through Mr. Lyle, she announced that illness prevented attendance. Judge Morris offered to take testimony at Edwin's house. Honoria refused that too. Ada visited her once more. The old woman was seated downstairs now, dressed and composed. working on church accounts. She had recovered enough to guard other people's virtue. Ada explained that Owen's legal claim might succeed. A verified grandmother could not erase a father, but Honoria's testimony would establish Nell's history, protect her inheritance, and strengthen Ada's position as family by marriage. Honoria said Owen had a lawful right. The girl should go with him. Ada heard the deeper convenience. If Nell left Bellweather, the past would leave with her. She asked whether Honoria truly believed blood mattered only when it removed a child from her sight. Honoria's pen scratched through the church account paper. Ada took the tin cylinder from her bag. She placed a candle inside and turned the key. Even in afternoon, the punched lights appeared faintly on the dark wallpaper. Honor moved across the portrait of Edwin's children. Honoria watched her lost name pass over the faces of the grandchildren she had acknowledged. Her hand began to shake. Ada did not ask again. She extinguished the candle and left the cylinder on the table. That night, a messenger returned it to Nell. No note came with it. March arrived with mud, wind, and a flood of municipal printing orders that Edwin expected to win. The town council chose Bellweather Printing and Bindery instead. Ada submitted the lowest responsible bid, but price was only part of the decision. 3 councilmen had wives in the cooperative. A 4th had watched Edwin arrive late on the day he lost the shop. Personal virtue and commercial judgment remained close relatives in a small town. Edwin responded by opening Mercer Job Printing in a rented storefront across the square. His sign was larger than Ada's. His front office contained a roll-top desk, a brass rail, and no working press. He sent jobs to Cincinnati while claiming local production. For several weeks, customers impressed by the Mercer name entered his door. Some remained. Others returned to Ada after delayed orders and bills containing freight charges. Honoria invested in Edwin's venture. Ada learned this without pain. The Mercer name had once seemed an inheritance she might be expelled from. Now it appeared across the square in 6-inch gold letters and belonged entirely to those who needed it. The guardianship hearing opened on March 19th. Judge Morris closed the courtroom to casual spectators. Only parties, witnesses, and 2 representatives from the county were admitted. The editor of the record waited outside. For Nell's sake, Ada was grateful. Owen sat with a lawyer supplied by a Working Men's Mutual Aid Society in Marlow. He wore the same brown suit as before, now carefully brushed. Ada sat with the cooperative's lawyer. Nell waited in Judge Morris's chambers with Miss Keene until called. The law began from a place favorable to Owen. He was the legal father. No court had terminated his rights. Poverty and past drinking, without recent neglect in his present household, did not erase them. Ada had cared for Nell only 3 months. 3 months. Ada could count them in school mornings, scorched oatmeal, folded sheets, and the growth of Nell's hair from a blunt infirmary cut to a length that required braiding. The court counted calendar pages. Owen testified first. He admitted desertion, violence, and drink. His lawyer had advised softer language. He refused it. He said Ruth left because staying had become dangerous. He made no claim that sobriety repaid her. He asked custody because he was Nell's father and wished to fulfill the duty he abandoned. Ada's lawyer asked why he had not searched during 3 sober years. Owen said fear. Then, after a pause, pride. He did not want Ruth to see that she had been right to leave. By the time pride weakened, he no longer knew where they were. Asked about Nell's inheritance, he said it should remain in trust beyond his control. Asked whether he would permit Ada contact, he said yes. He gave every answer a reformed man ought to give. Ada believed many of them. That made the case harder, not easier. Mr. Sloane described Ada's home as stable and Nell's progress as marked. Miss Keene reported improved reading, strong arithmetic, and fear responses diminishing except when separation was discussed. Dr. Ballard, to Ada's surprise, revised his earlier opinion. After observing her conduct, he found no evidence of current nervous illness. He said grief had been mistaken for weakness more often than medicine admitted. Ada wondered whether age had made him wise or merely cautious after hearing women discuss his first testimony. Mr. Pike testified privately about Ruth and Honoria. He brought no records. He brought memory, the paper theater, and the repaired cylinder. Judge Morris examined the birthmark emblem and Thomas's penciled words. None alone proved maternity, but together they supported a family history. The judge asked whether Honoria would appear. Mr. Lyle said no. Judge Morris could compel her, but he hesitated to send a deputy for an ill woman of 70. He ordered a physician's affidavit and continued. Ada testified after lunch. Her lawyer asked why she wanted permanent guardianship. She had prepared an answer about duty, affection, and Thomas's intention. It sounded respectable and incomplete. She looked at Owen. He had blood, law, and repentance. She had 3 months and a room above a bindery. If she tried to defeat him by claiming a purer love, Nell would become a prize awarded to the adult who performed remorse or devotion most convincingly. Ada told the judge she did not want Nell treated as proof of anything, not proof that a barren widow could become whole, not proof that Owen had reformed, not proof that Honoria's secret deserved punishment. Nell was a person with memory, fear, talent, anger, and wishes that did not exist to complete an adult story. She wanted guardianship because Nell had chosen safety in her rooms, because trust had begun there, and because moving her before that trust became strong would repeat every disappearance in the child's life. Ada did not ask the court to deny Owen forever. She asked it not to confuse fatherhood with immediate possession. Owen lowered his head. The judge called Nell. She entered carrying the pearwood bird in one pocket and the cylinder key around her neck. She sat with both feet just touching the floor. Judge Morris asked whether she understood the choice. Nell said everyone kept calling it a choice, though she had not been given one until the judge asked. He accepted the correction. She said she wanted to live with Ada. She wanted Owen to remain in Marlow where she could visit if Mrs. Ada came too. She did not want him erased or obeyed. She did not want to call Honoria anything. The judge asked why she trusted Ada. Nell thought for a long time. She said Ada returned things. When asked what she meant, Nell explained. Ada returned the music cylinder when Honoria claimed it. She returned wages in the proper amount. She returned apologies after anger. She returned choices other people took away. Even when a truth was bad, Ada returned that too. Ada's eyes filled before she could prevent it. Judge Morris recessed to consider. No one knew Honoria was in the courthouse until the door opened. She stood in the corridor supported by her cane and Mr. Lyle's startled clerk. Her black dress was streaked with mud at the hem. She had come in a hired cab without Edwin. The judge brought her into chambers. Ada, Owen, Nell, Mr. Sloane, and the lawyers followed. Honoria refused the witness chair. She stood. She gave her full name, Honoria Vale Mercer. Then she said Ruth Weller had been born Ruth Vale on June 17, 1858, at the Vale farm. Ruth was her daughter. The statement changed nothing visible. The courthouse clock struck 4. A wagon rattled over the square. Yet a life hidden for 44 years entered the record in a human voice. Honoria described Daniel Harrow, Lucy Vale, the summer cloak, the tin sky, and the money withheld. She admitted receiving the infirmary notices. She admitted visiting the gate and turning away. She admitted burning the paper queen because Thomas had drawn its face from a youthful sketch of Honoria, making the likeness impossible for her to bear. Nell stared at the floor. Honoria said the $600 belonged to Nell and had been deposited with the court that morning. Interest from her own funds had been added, bringing the trust to $1,400. She did not present this as generosity. She named it restitution. Ada heard the difference. Judge Morris asked why Honoria had changed her mind. The old woman looked at the child. She said a name had crossed a wall, and she saw that every acknowledged grandchild in Edwin's portraits had benefited from the life taken from Ruth. Reputation, money, and the family business had all been preserved by one infant's removal. Honoria had called that preservation duty. She no longer wished the court to mistake it for virtue. Nell touched the key at her throat. Honoria did not ask forgiveness. She told the judge that Ada had been more faithful to the Mercer family than the Mercer family had been to her. Thomas trusted Ada with Nell's future. Honoria used Ada's losses to prevent him from speaking. Any claim that Ada's childlessness made her unfit had begun as Honoria's weapon and should not survive as evidence. Ada could not look at her. The confession cost Honoria what she valued most, control over how the truth would be told. But even now, Ada sensed the old woman's precision. She had selected a closed hearing, not a church supper or a newspaper office. She had protected what privacy remained. It was not complete courage. Complete courage was rare. It was enough to change the case. Judge Morris asked Owen whether he wished to respond. Owen stood. He said Nell's trust in him was not ready. He had come expecting the law to return a daughter because he had finally decided to behave like a father. Listening to her, he understood that decision belonged to him, but return belonged partly to her. He withdrew his petition for immediate custody. Ada looked at him in surprise. Owen requested shared visitation under Mr. Sloane's supervision and the right to petition again after 1 year if Nell wished. His lawyer whispered urgently. Owen shook his head. Judge Morris asked whether anyone had promised him payment. Owen gave a bitter half-laugh. He said no one had ever paid him for doing the right thing late. The judge granted Ada permanent guardianship, subject to annual review and Owen's visitation. He ordered Nell's inheritance held independently until she was 18. He also ordered the records sealed except for the findings necessary to establish kinship. There was no applause. No one embraced across the chamber. A clerk sanded the order. Mr. Sloane checked the wording. The ordinary machinery of law moved around the most important sentence Ada had ever heard. Nell Weller would remain in her home. Outside the courthouse, rain had begun. Honoria waited beneath the stone arch while her cab was brought around. Nell approached her. Ada and Owen remained several steps away. The child took the pearwood bird from her pocket. Honoria looked at it but did not reach. Nell said her mother had wanted an answer. She had died without one. Honoria had given the answer to a judge instead. Honoria bowed her head. Nell said she did not forgive her. The old woman answered that she understood. Nell added that understanding was not the same as waiting. If Honoria wanted to know her, Honoria could come to the bindery on Thursday at 4. Nell would be working then. She would not go to Edwin's house. Honoria asked what she should bring. Nell considered. She said the truth about one thing each time. The cab arrived. Honoria descended the courthouse steps alone, refusing the driver's arm. At the curb she turned back. For a moment, Ada saw not the matriarch, widow, proprietor, or frightened young woman of 25. She saw an old woman who had outlived every excuse except habit. Then Honoria entered the cab and was driven away. Owen walked with Ada and Nell to the print shop. At the corner, he stopped. He asked Nell whether he might come the following Saturday for the supervised visit. She said yes. He asked whether he should bring the carving tools. She said no toys. She wanted him to bring Ruth's 2 old letters if he still had them. Owen's face tightened. He said he had them. Nell nodded. Truth about one thing each time was a rule with more than one use. At the shop, the presses were still running. Mr. Pike did not ask for the decision. He looked at Nell. She hung her coat, climbed onto her stool, and began folding the school readers where she had stopped that morning. Ada went to the new sign and turned it from closed to open. That was how the celebration began. Honoria came to the bindery on Thursday at 4. She arrived without Edwin, wearing a plain wool coat and no cameo. The bell over the door rang while Nell was sewing sections of a music folio on a frame. Every worker looked up. Mr. Pike removed his spectacles and polished lenses that were already clean. Honoria asked whether she might sit. Nell pointed to the stool beside her. The old woman lowered herself carefully. For several minutes she watched the needle pass through folded paper and around linen cord. Her hands rested on the head of her cane. At last, Nell asked for the promised truth. Honoria said Ruth's hair had been dark at birth, thick enough to lie flat across her forehead. Lucy Vale told her most newborn hair fell away, so Honoria cut one small lock before the baby left. She had kept it inside her christening Bible. Nell asked whether she still had it. Honoria said yes. Nell continued sewing. The visit lasted 19 minutes. The next Thursday, Honoria returned with the lock of hair folded in linen. Nell's own hair was lighter, but under the window the strand showed a reddish thread. Nell placed it inside Ruth's prayer card and asked another question. Had Ruth cried when Lucy took her? Honoria said Ruth slept. Honoria had been the one crying, though she made no sound because her father waited in the next room. The third Thursday, Nell asked why Honoria obeyed him. Honoria answered that she was afraid of poverty, disgrace, and being cast out. Then she added the truth she had omitted at the courthouse. She also wanted to marry Josiah Mercer. He was ambitious and attentive. She wanted the house in town, the print shop, and the position his name offered. She had not surrendered Ruth only because she was powerless. Part of her chose the easier future. Nell's needle stopped. That truth cost more than the others. Ada, listening from the cutting table, felt it enter the room without disguise. Nell asked whether the easier future had been happy. Honoria said, sometimes. Josiah admired strength until it opposed him. He gave her 2 sons and no equality. After his death, she discovered that managing the business pleased her more than managing his moods had done. Happiness existed, but it did not refund what bought it. Nell accepted the answer with a child's sternness and an old woman's caution. The visits continued. Some Thursdays, Honoria gave only facts. Ruth had a dimple in her left cheek. Daniel Harrow played the cornet badly. Lucy Vale favored peppermint lozenges. Other Thursdays, Nell asked nothing, and Honoria watched her work. Ada did not join them unless invited. Forgiveness did not arrive as a single scene. Trust did not open because blood had been named. Honoria occasionally forgot and issued an order. Nell would point to the door. Honoria learned to turn the order into a request or leave. Once, she criticized the crooked hem of Nell's school dress. Ada expected the old pattern to resume. Nell replied that anyone troubled by the hem could learn to sew. The following Thursday, Honoria brought a workbasket. Her stitches were smaller than Ada's and nearly invisible. She taught Nell how to reset the hem without once calling the first work poor. Owen came on Saturdays. The first letters he brought from Ruth were worn through at the folds. Nell could not read them alone. She asked Ada to read aloud while Owen sat across the room. Ruth had written without accusation. She described Nell's first lost tooth, a boarding house in Toledo, and work at a steam laundry. She asked Owen not to find them until he could enter a room without making everyone listen for his temper. In the second letter, written 2 years later, she said Nell remembered his carvings and still feared boots on stairs. Owen covered his face. Nell did not comfort him. He returned the following week. Their visits remained supervised for 6 months. Then Nell agreed to walk with him to the public garden while Ada followed at a distance. By autumn, she visited Marlowe for an afternoon. She came home carrying printer's slugs, 3 apples, and a silence Ada respected. Owen never petitioned again. He did not become harmless through remorse. Twice Ada saw anger flash in him, sudden and physical. The first time, he struck a table after a foreman withheld wages. Nell froze. Owen saw her face, left the room, and did not ask her to excuse him. The second time, he stopped before striking anything. Progress was not purity, but it was visible. He remained her father. Ada remained her home. The distinction became less threatening once no one tried to erase it. Bellweather Printing and Bindery survived its first year. The cooperative repaid interest, bought a used platen press, and hired 2 girls graduating from Miss Keene's school at the same wage as male apprentices doing the same work. Edwin's shop continued across the square, though its gold sign dulled. Competition made him more punctual and, against his will, more attentive to small customers. Ada discovered leadership differed from silent competence. She had to dismiss a pressman who arrived drunk, deny a friend credit, and admit when a school order was priced too low. Some cooperative meetings lasted until midnight because ownership gave every grievance a chair. Mrs. Alvarez argued fiercely over paper waste. Mr. Freeman demanded fair access to the front counter for black customers, not service through the alley. Ada agreed and then had to confront 2 white clients who threatened to leave. 1 left. 3 new ones came. The shop was no moral paradise. It was a place where fairness required repeated work and sometimes reduced profit. Ada preferred that difficulty to inherited certainty. Nell grew. By 12, she could set a clean line of type but preferred illustration. She drew faces on Thomas's unfinished paper figures, giving queens tired eyes, wolves foolish ears, and mothers' hands large enough to hold tools. Ada bought her colored inks for Christmas. Owen made a box to keep them. Honoria contributed a sable brush and asked before choosing it. The paper theater was completed in the winter of 1904. Not restored, completed. Nell refused to recreate the burned queen exactly. She kept the charred scrap inside the green book, but the new queen remained the crooked figure she made for Ada. The headless huntsman received Owen's carved head. Honoria painted the palace curtains evening violet. Mr. Pike repaired the stage slots. Miss Keene's pupils wrote a short play for the school exhibition. The story concerned a kingdom where every person received a name at birth, but only rich families were allowed to print theirs in gold. A washerwoman's daughter found a box of black type and began printing names on scraps. The king banned the scraps. The wind carried them through the town until every door bore the name of someone forgotten. It was not subtle. Ada loved it. The exhibition filled the school assembly room. Parents sat on benches beneath paper chains. Younger children fidgeted in stiff collars. The hardware store boy had returned to school and operated one of the stage lamps after offering Nell a muttered apology. Miss Keene announced that the paper theater had been designed by the late Thomas Mercer, completed by Nell Weller, and produced with help from members of the Bellweather community. She asked Nell whether any other name should be included. Nell stood beside the miniature stage. Ada saw her look toward Honoria in the third row. The old woman wore her cameo again. Nell said Ruth Weller had preserved the first pieces when keeping them would have been easier to avoid. The room became quiet. This was the first time Ruth's full name was spoken publicly in Bellweather. People looked toward Honoria. Edwin, seated at the aisle, stared ahead. Honoria rose. Ada feared she would leave. Instead, she repeated the name. Ruth Weller, she said, had been her daughter. No explanation followed. No plea softened it. She sat down. The school play began. Paper figures moved through the forest. The tin cylinder turned behind the stage, sending stars across the white backdrop. When Honor appeared, children in the front row gasped with delight. They did not know they were watching a confession converted into light. Perhaps that was best. A secret that had injured 3 generations became, for a few minutes, simply beautiful. Afterward, some women approached Honoria. Ada could not hear their words. One embraced her. Another passed without greeting. The minister's wife touched Honoria's sleeve, received no response, and moved on. Public truth did not produce a single public judgment. It divided according to the character of each listener. Edwin left before the refreshments. He did not speak to Honoria for 2 months. Ada felt no triumph. She had once imagined exposure as a balancing scale, truth placed on one side, justice rising neatly on the other. In life, truth was less orderly. It freed Nell from namelessness, wounded Edwin's children, relieved Mr. Pike, embarrassed the church, and gave gossip one final feast. Necessary things could still carry harm. Honoria endured it. That was part of her restitution, too. In June, Nell asked to visit Ruth's grave at the county cemetery. The infirmary had buried her beneath a small, numbered stone. With the trust's approval, Nell purchased a marker. She chose the words herself. Ruth Weller, beloved mother, she kept the light. Ada, Owen, Honoria, and Mr. Pike attended the placing. They stood beneath a hot white sky while workmen settled the stone. No minister spoke. Ruth had lived among different churches and belonged entirely to none. Nell placed the original paper tree at the base. Rain would ruin it, but she said some objects had finished carrying what was asked of them. Honoria laid down the pearl cameo. Ada recognized the gesture's danger. The cameo was expensive and might be stolen before sunset. Honoria knew. She left it anyway. Owen placed nothing. He read Ruth's 2 letters again and returned them to Nell. On the ride home, no one tried to call the gathering a family occasion. It was grief shared by people who had each failed Ruth differently. That was honest enough. 3 years passed. Ada marked them not by anniversaries but by changes in height. Nell's eyes rose from Ada's shoulder to her chin, then nearly level. The iron bed became too short. Her school dresses required repeated bands at the hem. On the doorframe inside the little chamber, Nell penciled a line each birthday. At 14, she asked whether Ada wished to adopt her legally. The question came while they were cleaning glue brushes. Ada had considered it every week and avoided raising it. Guardianship was secure. Adoption would alter Nell's legal name and might be interpreted as replacing Owen. Ada wanted the permanence. She did not want to demand its symbol. She asked what name Nell wished to carry. Nell said Weller belonged to her father, whom she was learning to know. Vale belonged to her mother, who had been denied it. Mercer belonged to Thomas and Ada, but also to Honoria and Edwin. She did not want to choose one person by discarding the others. Ada said the law liked fewer truths than that. Nell smiled. She suggested Nell Weller, adopted daughter of Ada Mercer. They filed the petition. Owen consented after a long night and one broken chair at his own house, which he repaired before telling Nell. Honoria signed as grandmother. Edwin refused to attend but sent Thomas's watch, saying it should pass to the child Thomas intended to help. Ada accepted it without pretending the gesture settled their history. The adoption took place in the same chambers where Honoria confessed. Judge Morris asked Nell whether she understood that Ada would become her legal parent. Nell said Ada had been doing the work for 3 years and the law was late. The judge laughed. Ada signed with a hand steadier than it had been at any wedding, funeral, business transfer, or guardianship hearing. Outside, Nell did not call her mother. She had called Ruth that. The word belonged to memories Ada did not wish to replace. She continued to say Mrs. Ada for another 6 months. Then one winter evening, influenza kept Ada in bed. Nell brought broth, argued with the doctor, and slept in the chair beside her. At dawn, Ada woke to hear Nell whispering near the stove. The kettle was boiling over. Nell burned her fingers lifting it and said without thought that Mother would scold if she ruined another cloth. Both of them went still. Nell looked frightened, as if the word had escaped without permission. Ada did not reach for her. She did not turn the moment into a ceremony. She said the cloth could be washed. Nell poured the water. Later that morning she used the word again. This time it stayed.